Welcome. I'm James Calicut, Waterfowl and Upland Game Bird Extension Specialist.
I'm Mark McConnell, Assistant Professor of Upland Birds at Mississippi State University.
Dr. Brian Davis, Professor, Waterfowl and Wetlands Conservation.
The three of us are all biologists and hunters. Join us for discussions about game bird conservation and management and the science behind it. Of course, we'll also have conversations about bird dogs and bird hunting as well. This is Game Bird University. All right, so we've got a great guest with us today, someone I've known for quite a long time, Mississippi State alumnus as well, Matt Chouinard with us. He is the Waterfowl Programs Director for Delta Waterfowl Foundation, and, it's late May, and it's around the time, a lot of mallards are well into nesting, and birds should have settled in to where they're planning on nesting. And so a big thing that we all talk about as duck biologists or duck hunters is how those prairie conditions are, how those breeding areas as far as wetland and grassland habitat, what that all looks like, and hopefully setting ducks up for successful breeding attempts. And so I wanted to have Matt come on to talk about that since he's right there in the heart of the duck factory. But Matt, welcome. Glad to have you here.
James, Mark, thanks for having me. It's always great to talk to folks I kind of go way back with a little bit anyway. At least we have a lot of history at State. So appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah. Actually, Matt, I don't know if I've ever told you this before or not, but when I was in high school, so we go back further than you think, but not personally, I was thinking about what I was going to do for a living, and I had no idea you could be a duck biologist. And I was reading a Delta Waterfowl magazine one day, and they were highlighting all the student research, and it said, training the next generation of duck biologists. And I read an article on your master's research, and it caught my eye because it had Mississippi State University under it. And that's where I found out you could be a duck biologist, and you could do it at Mississippi State. So I knew from that point forward where I was going. So
yeah, they didn't put in that article. They didn't put in that article how much they pay you, though, did they?
No. I got here, and Rick Kaminsky just didn't mention that.
No.
Delta student?
Mm-hmm.
That's correct. Yeah, I think I kind of followed the path, right, that a lot of Delta students do, or a lot of waterfowl biologists do. I kind of stumbled through undergraduate, doing jobs on the side. I was a big duck hunter, of course, and was looking for the next step in my career. And someone told me about, Delta Waterfowl had summer jobs. So I went to work for Delta in the summer and worked on a couple different projects and thought, man, this is like you, James, this is cool stuff. And then I thought, well, I guess I better think about doing some graduate work and wrote a proposal and Delta funded it, and went lucky enough that I got chosen to work at State, and the rest is history.
Yeah. And it's funny how many waterfowl folks, have come through Delta for summer work, either a graduate student or a research assistant as an undergrad technician. I know I did. Mark probably entered data that I collected in the prairies because he was Frank's.
I entered. Oh God, what was his last name?
Piron.
Yeah.
I entered Piron's data, his blue cards, and the initials of the observer every now and then was JTC. Little did I know later.
Yeah.
I'd never get rid of it.
Yeah, you could have done like Matt and laughed at how many different ways I spelled coolie on those maps when you have to draw where the nest is. Till this day, I don't know that I know how to spell coolie.
Is the one who first heard the term moron sandwich. I did something wrong entering his data. I was trying to clean it up, and I'm explaining it to him, and he looks at me and goes, "Did you eat a moron sandwich for lunch?" That's the first time I'd ever heard that, and I've been using it ever since.
I heard that a lot the summer of 2007 when I worked for him.
I was going to say, yeah, that's a rite of passage, right? Getting the technicians getting teased by the graduate students, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Matt, how does it look up there?
Right here in Bismarck, it looks a lot better than it did a week ago. I think like every year, the prairies, some years there's more of a mixed bag than others. We had some areas that caught more snow this past winter than others. In general, we went into it, though, pretty concerned. North Dakota was dry, went into the winter dry. Saskatchewan was pretty dry, or really dry. I guess I should qualify that. Southeastern Alberta was dry. And then, you have that winter and you're like, fingers crossed, what are we going to have? Are we going to get a bunch of snow? And in Bismarck, we got virtually nothing. We had no snow. We carried over some water, so it didn't look terrible to start, but here, over the last week, we've had 5 inches of rain at my house. It's a little late, I could probably talk for hours about it, but a lot of the ducks, we had an early spring. It was warm. It warmed up real quick. There was no snow. So I think a lot of ducks, if they were going to settle, they probably went on through looking for better water. But now the table's set for anything that's, just starting to nest and re-nesting. There's a lot of water around this part of North Dakota.
What's the re-nesting for most of your dabblers? Is that on average? I know with quail, we have a lot of re-nesting, but the majority of the contribution to recruitment is that first nest.
Right.
Is it about the same with ducks?
It differs by species. Some species are a little more prone to re-nesting, like mallards. They've been known to re-nest, 4 or 5 times during a nesting season. Others, like a canvasback, is kind of a 1, maybe 2 at best, and done. So the first nest is always, of course, the best, but the species also have different timelines for when they really get started. The mallards and pintails showed up here, a month ago. We've got mallard nests that are probably hatching right around now or within the next couple weeks. And so they have kind of a longer stretch of time to pull a nest off. Whereas, the shovelers and teal are really, really getting fired up now. And so this habitat condition improvement over the last week is really going to help them. But they're also, like a teal doesn't have a whole lot of re-nesting effort either. So just depends on the species.
Gotcha. Bring on more shovelers, man. We don't mind shooting those in Mississippi.
Yeah.
I think fingers crossed. I think we like having good habitat. Obviously it'd be ideal if you had it from the beginning. But, I think we talked a little bit about, or we like to talk about just having great habitat through the season, not just at the beginning, because not only do the ducks need to have, those good wetland conditions for the protein and invertebrates so that they can, build a clutch. You need good habitat for those broods, once they hatch. If your wetlands start drying up, that means that, the ducklings, the only place they have to go is pretty exposed. And you want to have wetlands that the water extends it well into the margin so that they have a place to hide.
Yeah, so we think we're set up good if you continue to get some rain, that those brood rearing conditions will be?
Yeah, I think North Dakota and, South Dakota was really dry to start this year. I know they've caught some of this rain too. I think North Dakota is set up a lot better than we were a week ago. I think we'll be in decent shape. I'd like to see a little more widespread rain, of course, up into Saskatchewan. They get a later start than we do. They're probably a few weeks behind in terms of their nesting chronology just because, they're further north. But they were in worse shape. Saskatchewan's been in tough shape for probably close to 10 years now. There's been good spots where they've caught lots of water, but we haven't had that really widespread good habitat in Saskatchewan for 8 to 10 years.
And I know, at least from our from a Mississippi standpoint, from a lot of our ban return data, that southeastern Saskatchewan is fairly important to Mississippi ducks,
That's right. Yeah, I think Saskatchewan, historically, it's the biggest chunk of the Prairie Pothole region. It's the biggest chunk of the good habitat. So, we need it to be in great shape for us to have those really bumper crop years of ducks. And as you guys know, really what makes hunting, the best is when you have a lot of young ducks. They make us all look like championship duck callers and everything else, right? We did everything right when there's a bunch of young ducks around, but when you get this stretch of years where, the duck numbers aren't in terrible shape, but, we're recruiting a few new ducks every year, and then, you're dealing with a lot of adults that are a little bit tougher to fool, and they know where they want to go and where they're safe too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mark and I have had our challenges before, even on the North Dakota prairie of having successful duck hunting. We've had years where lots of juveniles and good weather, and then we've had years of what seemingly felt like hunting ducks in the last day of the hunting season in Mississippi. With how wary they were, and so
they can be that way. We've had it, even as a guy that lives right here in North Dakota, there are years when you start heading into the fall, you're like, man, it's going to be a tough duck season, and other years where you're like, you're looking around and thinking, man, this is going to be great. So I look at it right now. I mean, it looks fantastic. I drove around, the last day or two with seeing all this water, and there's standing water out in all the ag fields and lots of ducks, that have quickly found that, that new water and are feeding out there. And it looks like I'm optimistic about our fortune for this year. But, time will tell. I think we'll see how it goes over the next month or so. If these conditions continue and we start getting some rain and, a little more widespread across the prairies, I think we'll be in better shape.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the last time. Was it 2014 was the last year in the prairies? Well, we didn't go after that, but that was the last year. Or no, it was 12. 14 was the year we went with Eric, and it didn't go well. And 12 was the year we went with Heath and Palumbo, and that was the last year we did really well.
Yeah.
The last time we were up there after that, the Eric trip, it was 70 degrees and a south wind almost all week. It was brutal.
And I think that was most of our problem rather than how many birds were around. It was probably just the stale birds like if anywhere else along the flyway. If you don't have new push birds come in, then
you get those stretches of time. Yeah, you get those stretches of time here where the weather just, kind of gets real mild and real comfortable, and it's real comfortable for the ducks too to not do a whole lot. But I'm all, we're all duck hunters. I'm excited about the prospects for the fall. I mean, I guess they're, conducting the BPOP survey right now, so we'll have a better sense, in a couple months, I guess we'll have a better sense of what the numbers look like. But I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to have some decent production, at least here in North Dakota.
Yeah, one of the things, you mentioned something about snow and rain. So a lot of folks in the Deep South, since we don't deal with snow very much and don't think of it much as a contributor to our moisture levels, like just generally ballpark it for me, on an average year, how much of the moisture going into wetland conditions and where they stand is driven by snow versus rainfall, or is it just complete chaotic?
That's a good question. I would say for the most part, when we think of our best years here for spring habitat conditions, it's because we've had a ton of snow. Now, the last 2 years in North Dakota, we haven't had a lot of snow, and we've started catching rain in May, and it's really made up for a lot of that deficit. I was just looking at a rainfall or a precipitation amount for one of the cities near Bismarck here, and from July until now, there was about a 9-inch deficit in precipitation for annual normal. They were about 9 inches below the annual norm, and this 5-inch, 6-inch rain, basically got them a lot closer. They're still in a bit of a deficit. But normally in the prairies, I'd say when we've had our just fantastic, crazy wetland conditions, it's been because of really excessive snowfall. And then, you get that snow, you kind of go into a winter. Ideally, what you'd have is you'd go into a winter with wet conditions. So then you'd create, like, when it freezes, there'd be like a frost seal, so that ground is already saturated, it's frozen. And then you get a bunch of snow on top of that. And then when the snow melts, it really has nowhere to go but run off into wetlands and fill wetlands up. When you notice here, what I've noticed here is that we've been in a bit of a, we've had good precipitation, but we haven't had that crazy precipitation. You see some of those semi-permanent wetlands that, they still haven't quite got back to those really good levels they were. You see all the temporaries and seasonals, they fill up really quickly just because of that snow or rain, but even some of the semi-perms are a little bit below what they've been 10 years ago.
So Matt, what would you say was the last year that we really had that kind of conditions where when we'd say, like we often say a lot of times when talking about, duck population are a little lower than we'd like, well, it gets wet again up there, that's when it's going to rebound. And so when would that have been 15 or?
It was right around there. I mean, if you look at the harvest numbers, I believe it was 14, 15 where you just saw really, the last time you saw really high harvest levels. And I think that tracks pretty good with production, right? When you have those really awesome production years is when you're going to have that really high harvest years. And it's been kind of a general decline in harvest. Some of it's, losing hunters. Of course, that's always an issue, but a lot of it was we just haven't had that bumper crop of production in 10 years or so.
I'm gonna ask possibly a stupid question, but I really don't know the answer. Can it be too wet on the prairies for duck production?
Boy, I don't
Or
know.
that have to be catastrophic and unrealistic?
Yeah. I mean, one of the, in some years you will have nest loss due to flooding. And I would imagine like this rainstorm we've had here has been also associated with cold weather. So these early hatch broods, if they're less than 10 days old, you get cold weather and rain. I mean, it's a little tougher for a hen to keep them, thermal regulated so that they stay warm enough. But in general, I mean, I can't really think of too much of a negative for duck production in terms of moisture. The more you have, the better. It even tends to, it spreads, that excess moisture allows those ducks to populate areas that may have been marginal in drier years, and they turn out to be ultra productive in those. I'm thinking I'll take too much. It's not great for farmers, but I'd take too much moisture over a lack of it any day.
Yeah, makes sense.
Ha, lost my question.
Well, you bring up the farmers, that's a challenge. I mean, even in the quail world, I do a lot of work with ag producers and trying to get them to do things. And it's a different landscape, obviously, than what you're dealing with, because the wetlands we have here, not that we haven't drained plenty of them, as we have, but it's a little more black and white, what's a wetland maybe and what's not. Whereas up there, it seems like y'all's topography and the pothole scenario there makes it a little, like,
Right.
pardon the pun, it muddies the water
Right.
on what's a wetland or not,
Yeah.
and what to do about it. So like I know Delta, the duck hunters organization, y'all got a lot of, I assume y'all do some work with farmers. Like what's the what's the what's the primary challenge and the primary remedy, if there is one, for keeping wetlands up there, especially those ephemeral ones we're talking about?
Right. Well, I think, I mean, the challenge is that this area is productive. It's productive farmland. And so if a farmer wants to, maximize the productivity on his land, his best option is to make as much of it, farmable and tillable as possible. So the challenge is to, providing some level of incentive for them that it is, it's more valuable to leave it as it is, or at least as valuable than it is to drain it. And drainage is, I mean, it's been going on for a long time. The further east you go in the Prairie Pothole region, you get into Iowa, the Prairie Pothole region is, I mean, it's been highly degraded. Same with southwestern Minnesota, eastern Dakotas as well. It's kind of moving west to some degree, but everybody's been trying to farm as much as they can as possible. So you've got to have programs that can kind of incentivize leaving those wetlands on the landscape, and then, also try to have some habitat on the top of that for the ducks to nest in.
Yeah.
So,
And
go ahead, James.
I was just gonna say, thinking about some of the challenges besides just wetland, I don't think it's one of those trying to make that case to a producer or something, or usually if you can tie it to something, well, they can see the benefit on their own farm. But I think a lot of those things, like the ill effects beyond just what we are interested in, which is the duck, nesting and habitat
Right.
and all that, is if there is flooding or anything that's caused by the fact that now this basin's not there, may not be on their farm, maybe on the person down the
road, right? Yeah.
So
I think that, people have done a really good job in some areas of moving that water off of their land as quickly as possible in the spring so they can get in there and farm. And that has, there's pretty strong indicators that that's causing some of the, the more frequent flood events that we've had in some of the river systems. So there's, like you said, there's other negatives beyond the duck side. And I think, I mean, the old adage, that there's the belief that if you just drain all those small wetlands into a bigger wetland, it's just as good, because that bigger wetland will be around all the time. And we like to say 10 one acre wetlands are 10 times as productive as one 10-acre wetland, right? Those pairs are territorial. They're as many wetlands as we can keep on the landscape for ducks, the better. And there's been lots of folks working on that and doing great things. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has protected a lot of wetlands in North Dakota, and other NGOs and partners across the prairies have done a good job of protecting some wetlands, but we're still losing them.
Well, it seems like those smaller ones are the most vulnerable from the ag standpoint.
Right.
And I'm curious, years ago, I met a student he was at NDSU. He told me, I can't remember his name, but he told me that he was looking at, in these small kind of wetlands, in North Dakota, after they drained them and then farmed them, he was looking at like yield data from the yield monitors and looking at what kind of yield they were cutting, and
No.
the argument being like, is it really worth it? Right? Because on a dry year, yeah, you're going to have maybe a little more moisture there than, but on a wet year, you theoretically could introduce a host of agronomic challenges associated with it. Do you have a sense of these, like when they
Yeah.
drain these farmlands, are they making just banger
Yeah.
crops for a few years and then it gets wet, or what?
I'm not a farm economics guy, but I suspect there's other ways, just even if it doesn't, even if farming through that wetland isn't as productive, per acre as some of those other areas, there's probably ways to through farm programs to make money on those acres, despite the fact that they're not as productive. But yeah, like I said, I'm not a farm economics guy, but a lot of the really, in North Dakota, well, across the prairies, right, farmers, there's fewer small farmers, and a lot of the bigger farmers have figured out, the best way. They're pretty smart about the economics of it all, so they know if they're getting rid of that wetland and they're farming it, they're making some money on it for sure.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's a challenge because the acreage available through CRP or something is not sufficient to cover that landscape.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's been, of course, a problem too, just the loss of CRP or the decline of CRP, I mean, CRP protected a lot of wetlands as well, just because there wasn't really an incentive to drain them if it was in a CRP patch, right? And so not only did it have good habitat for nesting, it protected the wetlands.
Yeah, and now we've got well, the current version that we've seen in the outline for the House version, it's definitely going to reduce the payments a little bit more, which is expected to some degree. We've only got 1.9-ish million acres left before we reach the cap, and it sounds like we're hearing they're going to kind of zero it out, no increase, no decrease, which means we may not get much of we might not get any increase at all. So we're sitting at 2 million acres for left to enroll for the next little bit, which will probably go pretty quickly considering the farm economy right now.
Sure.
And that's the other, beyond, in addition to all the, the wetland loss is just, that's the amount of CRP, probably grass, dense grassland nesting cover that has left the landscape, and
Right.
the last decade has been
Yeah.
probably been substantial too. I don't have an exact stat on that right now, but I'm sure it's not good.
No, and we kind of we had like the sweet spot, right? We had lots of water, lots of CRP, in the Dakotas. We had that, kind of perfect storm for duck production for a while there. And now we've kind of hit the other end of that spectrum a bit, reduction in CRP, other grassland losses, and then the wetland, we just haven't had great wetland conditions, and we've lost some wetlands as well. So it's not been, from a duck hunting perspective, the last 10 years or so, you don't look at the BPOP and think, oh, we've just crashed, but you look at if you look at the age ratios in ducks over the last 6 or 8 years, you can kind of see that tells the story. They're just not. There's still a lot of breeding ducks. They're just not as productive right now because the conditions aren't great, aren't as great in a widespread area.
Yeah, for sure. Well, were you about to say something, Mark?
Well, I was just going to say it sucks for us because even if you get a really great production year, we need certain weather conditions to have a decent season down here. So as much as I love hearing great conditions, expecting a good hatch, it's like, yay for y'all.
He's up every year, Mark, so I don't feel a whole lot of sympathy. But, by some years since I've lived in Bismarck, I kind of, I think the weather patterns have been such that, we've had some years where we've stayed warmer longer. But there's been quite a few years here where we froze up somewhere around I say froze up, the prairies.
Yeah.
Which, there'll be some ducks that stick along the Missouri River and maybe in the bigger lakes for a little bit longer. But we froze up probably 3 or 4 times in the last 6 or 8 years, about maybe half the time by the end of October where we've been done. And
wow.
And you kind of go out and you think you're chasing that last little stretch of ducks. But with that said, last year, I was hunting ducks out in the prairies, the week before Thanksgiving here. So yeah, that's on the other end of the spectrum.
I guess
That makes me a little less jealous, I guess.
Yeah. I guess if you don't have a whole lot of snow cover to push the mallards out, maybe you could go over to the Missouri and probably kill some mallards over that way a little later. But
yeah, that's right.
But yeah, that's the thing we always have to tell folks is when they ask about the breeding population survey and what well, it says we've got a lot of ducks, and like,
Yeah.
well, there is a lot of ducks, but
Yeah.
that doesn't mean you're going to see them in Mississippi. A lot
We,
of things,
James, we like to say we don't hunt the breeding population, we hunt the fall flight. And when you have a big fall flight, which is the breeding population, whatever survives the breeding, and then all their ducklings that hatch and they got to adulthood, that's when you have a big fall flights, when you have a great year.
Yeah, and that's what we when I was a state biologist and we were putting, always having to do the press release as soon as the VPOP comes out. It was always our like kind of caveat statement is like, there's still the whole recruitment end, and then weather to get those birds here, so don't get too excited just yet, because you can have a year like, I guess was it the 2015, 14-15 or 15-16 season that was so dang good.
14-15, I think.
Yeah. And we had a really, record high BPOP and had good conditions and good fall flight. And then we actually had the weather and it was a great season. But you could have had those same conditions up in your neck of the woods, Matt, and then not had the weather, and it could still be, terrible for us. And so I always tell, folks, it's odd because you can have, if we got really good weather, even with a not so great production year, we might have a better year than in some years where there's a great production year and they just don't make it here. So we always have to give that that caveat to the hunter. That people ask, like, I don't believe there's that many ducks, and it's like, well,
that's a tough one, right? And people's recollection of things too, right? Like you guys have a good memory for those seasons or whatever, but I feel like I have a pretty good feeling for how things have gone or duck seasons or whatever. But then, someone will pull out a journal from, one of my brothers likes to keep a journal of hunting, and he'll pull out a journal and he knows exactly how many ducks we got in a year. And like, yeah, it wasn't as bad as we thought. And sometimes you'll hear people say, this is the worst duck season I've ever had. And, like my dad used to say that once in a while, this is the worst one ever. And I'd be like, well, Dad, what about the year we didn't shoot a duck because the woods froze up or whatever? And he's like, oh, yeah.
So, duck hunters, as a self-identified one, but pretty much the worst long-term memory ever.
For sure.
Turkey hunters maybe second.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, it's pretty funny. Yeah. Same thing. And we're more prone, I think, the waterfowl population community, we seem more prone maybe to outlandish explanations of the very temporary pattern we're observing, maybe more so than some other. I've heard some. We did, Matt. We did an episode with Stafford and Dave Godwin about myth busting, essentially all the stuff you hear. Yeah, the duck hunters. We can come up with some stuff to explain all that. But my best season of my life was 2001, 2002, I think. And in North Louisiana it was either 99, 2000 or 2000, 2001. That was it was unparalleled in my mind. And I've come pretty close in grad school. What year was it, Calicut? We had a couple years there.
That 9-10 year was really good.
That was insane. That may have rivaled it, but other than that, but yeah, those seasons.
I bet it was 2000, 2001 because I was working down for Frank at LSU, and we were collecting wings, and that was the year that it got so cold that we had Canada geese. Like it restored the Canada geese coming to southeastern Missouri and southern Illinois. It was epic, right? And so I remember driving north from Baton Rouge, and I was going up through Mississippi and seeing Canada geese at like Grenada, flying across the interstate. I'm like, are these Canada geese? Like, like you just didn't see them like that, anymore. And so that's what I'm guessing that super awesome year you're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But I've heard that many a times from folks about they think it's the worst year, and they actually, the ones that keep records, and then they'll go back and look. I think Larry Reynolds was telling me that at a flyweight meeting one time. He said, I was complaining like crazy this year. And he said, I went back and it's like one of my best seasons, in the last, 10 years or something. And so
you can have those one day deals where you have a fantastic hunt and it can make that season super memorable, or you can have one of those days where you slog through mud for, and you about killed yourself, getting out there and not shoot a duck. And then you'd be like, that can make your season go the other way too, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think A lot of my memories of thinking that the seasons were really great, probably just from a handful of hunts in that year that just were spectacular. And I may have killed more ducks in other years since then, and
Yeah.
I just remember that.
Well, we talked about that too several podcasts ago. Like what makes a good duck season?
Mm-hmm.
Like I have years where I didn't kill. Like that year, Calico, what was it? It was Rain was 2 years old, so that would have been I don't know what year, 12 maybe.
Yeah.
We had a handful of really good hunts on public land, but that's one of my favorite, most memorable seasons. But it was my dog's first season, So we probably didn't kill more ducks than we had the year before, the year after. But I was focused on her. She picked up ducks, so like I consider that a great season in my book. But I don't really know how many ducks we killed.
We probably only had like 3 good hunts that year, and that was.
But they were really good,
They're
They
memory
were
hunts,
good.
right? They call it, what do they call them? Memory hunts, right? Where they stick with you so you'll never forget them, right? But,
Exactly.
yeah, anyway.
Man, we could probably spend the whole rest of the podcast talking about duck seasons and the duck hunter's psychology and memory and whatnot.
I am kind of curious what kind of dog you hunt with, though, man.
Said, pardon?
What kind of dog do you hunt with?
I have a black lab.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're not like Frank and carry one of those crazy spaniels around them.
No, not a Springer guy, but he likes, well, I think Frank is actually more crazy about pheasant hunting than he is about duck hunting. He likes them both, but so I think that's what got him in the Springer game.
Yeah, makes sense.
Does he still play badminton?
He does, though he's taking up pickleball now. I think
I'm surprised at his age he can still do that.
Yeah.
And I'm only going to talk as much crap as I can about him because we're going to have him on, next week, Cal?
Mm-hmm. He's beat the tar out of me and other technicians and that were at the time, half his age,
Yeah, I think he's finally starting to slow down a bit in badminton, but I still wouldn't put money on anybody beating him.
Yeah, oh yeah, I don't doubt it. He had a whole another career ahead of him as a professional badminton player.
But he says Jonathan Scarth used to would beat him every time. So I don't know if you guys know Jonathan, but he was a former Delta, president, back when I was a student, and that's who got Frank into badminton, I think. But I think badminton, that may be Canada's national sport, so.
It's going, toe to toe with hockey. Which one's?
Which one's? Well, I'm a programs guy, so of course, this time of year is when we have a couple intensive management programs that I help deliver. The one that I'm more focused on, the one I did my graduate work on, is the Hen House program. For those that aren't aware, it's a type of artificial nest structure. It's you'd say it's kind of like a wood duck box, but it's really, really different. It's a tube that's placed on a post over a wetland, really just used primarily by mallards. Delta has about, this year we have over 14,000 of them out in the prairies producing ducks. The beauty of them is that they're over water, and, most nest loss is by predators. You put a hen house over the water and a mallard nests in it, it's pretty tough for a skunk or a fox or a coyote to get to them. So that program's going strong and growing. And then, of course, we have our predator management program, which is more geared towards the other side of the equation. The hen house kind of keeps, provides a location where ducks can nest. Predator can't get them. Predator management's more geared towards, we don't have that much nesting cover left, and where we've got good wetlands and we've got some residual nesting cover, we can kind of restore that balance where the predator numbers, we kind of, trap them to get them to a level where ducks can be successful and productive.
What's the nest success on those hen houses, or average?
It kind of depends. It depends on the region, but the average nest success in Manitoba, which is where we had our most conclusive research. I shouldn't say conclusive, but most extensive research. It averaged 61%.
Holy smokes!
And so, we at that time we also had students nest dragging to locate mallards and in more traditional grass nesting cover, and nest success was less than 5%. So it was a pretty eye-opening to see that level of productivity.
What for the nests that fail? What is getting them in those houses? I mean, that's still a tremendously crazy high nest success.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing about hen houses is you put them out in a wetland and you put them out in wintertime. And so, where they are relative to the water level might change depending on the wetland conditions. But I would say the primary nest predators of them are to be avian predators of some kind. In the parklands where we have, a pretty extensive nest structure program, ravens are a thing. We don't have those as much in North Dakota. But, occasionally, say water levels come up, you'll also have issues with, some other critters can get in there if they can swim up and climb in them.
And are they fairly highly occupied, like the occupancy rates, like the use rates high?
Occupancy rates of the nest structures during that 5-year study were 82%. So pretty high, and it depends on, when you get down in North Dakota, the usage rates aren't quite as high, but nest success is higher. And I think it kind of they're related to each other, right? When you're up in the parklands of Canada and nest success is only like 2 to 3% on the ground, you're going to nest a lot. Mallard renests a lot. They're going to nest a lot of times, and they're going to keep trying spots. And so they end up in a hen house, and that's why the usage rate was so high there. Whereas in North Dakota, the background nest success isn't quite as low, so the usage rates are a little lower, but the nest success is higher. Their production is very similar.
I don't know enough about it. So sorry for the 1,000 questions. What's the maintenance like on those? Like, what do you have to attend to them once a year, or?
Once a year, yeah. Kind of like, we recommend that with wood duck boxes as well. We have contractors that we pay to go out and maintain them once a year. In wintertime, so that they're full of clean nesting material. The mallards don't bring anything to the hen house, and that the exterior looks good. One of the beauties of a hen house is that the hen not only has a better chance of hatching a nest, she's better protected because she's got, basically a wire tunnel around her so that, an avian predator can't reach her. And so, so we have them maintained once a year, and we have our contractors use their phones. We have an app that they can input data so we can keep track of where they're all at, what their use rates are, and what kind of condition they're in case we need to replace them. So it's pretty handy.
Really cool.
Just over 14,000.
Man.
Yeah. So we've got a lot. Yeah, we've got a few contractors out there working.
All right. So now my question is that a number y'all plan to increase, or is that about as much as y'all can handle?
We're actually planning to get to around 110,000. Delta really started with our nest structure program. We started studying them in the 90s, but we really didn't start growing the program, in any regard until about 10 years ago. And even then it was kind of just like, some modest increases, trying to encourage other folks to get behind them and work with them. But the program has really grown in the last 4 or 5 years, probably grown the last 5 years, probably 5,000 hen houses.
And I would not have guessed there would have been that many already, much less.
Yeah.
Thinking about 100,000, that's pretty incredible. And to have the kind of monitoring data you have from the folks going out there and
we have a goal of producing 250,000 mallards through hen houses. That's what we believe that the 110,000 hen houses would get us to that number.
And I'm going to show my complete ignorance of the waterfowl population dynamics literature. Just like after they hatch and they make it to, I assume, a few weeks old where their survival is somewhat planed out, what is the to the fall flight survival from nestlings in that year? Do y'all have numbers on that? Like with quail, like hatching's great, like we obviously, but nest success isn't actually what drives quail populations. It's not the biggest driver of lambda, right?
Yeah.
Population growth. And I don't know enough about ducks. Do y'all have pretty high survival from to the fall flight, or is there tons of things trying to eat them?
So that's a good question. For ducks, nest success is the biggest driver in at least the mid-continent population of mallards, and we suspect it's probably the same for most other, at least the upland nesting species. But duckling survival and hen survival are kind of the number 2 and number 3. So the hen houses, of course, help the nest hatch. They do have the potential to help broods survive just because they're over water, so the ducklings don't have to make an overland movement like they would from a nest in the grass. But typical duckling survival, it really depends. We've seen it really low, like 20%. And we've seen it as high as, Josh Stafford, who I guess was on one of your podcasts. One of his study sites, I believe, had close to 70% duckling survival. And so I don't know if there's a number in there that is optimal for making sure they're, they're making it to the fall flight. But and this is when I say duckling survival, that's to 30 days. Typically, most of the research projects, and once they reach 30 days, their survival is very similar to the adults.
Man, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I imagine you at least cut out some suite of predators, with having it over water, like that mink and things like that, that would tend to get them on their trek from the nest to the wetland from a ground nesting individual. So just left with avian predators and I guess pike and whatever.
Just about anything else, yeah. If they're in the right wetland, hopefully they won't have any pike. But
I don't know. I think about wood ducks in the southeast and like largemouth bass and bullfrogs.
we don't have quite the predator suite those poor wood ducks down there have. There's not alligators. There's very few snakes here.
That's what I loved about the summer I spent up there working for Delta is I didn't have to worry about a cottonmouth one.
Yeah, nothing like that.
Or alligator.
We had a UGA
badger hole and breaking my ankle was about as much as I had to worry about.
Was that you or somebody else that got beat up by a coot in a canoe? Got scratched up. Was that not you? It was Thayer. Justin Thayer told me they grabbed a coot one time when they were in a canoe doing something and beat the hell out of him. When he interned up there, I guess that'd have been the summer before I knew.
Thayer would get beat up by a coot.
God, I hope he's listening to this. Yeah, speaking of bullfrogs, just to throw in a quail anecdote while I've got two duck people here. James Martin at UGA, they had doing research at Tall Timbers, they had a bullfrog eat a bobwhite chick. It was a radio chick, and that's how they found it, which was pretty freaking cool.
Yeah, pretty crazy.
I hope that happens.
Yeah, they also didn't they have a radio-marked snake eat a radio-marked bobwhite chick?
Yeah, they had a VHF tag for both of them, and the X-ray you can see both of the snake. You can see both units. Yeah, it was great.
Well, Matt, I know you've got another meeting to get to, but we really appreciate having you come on. We'll definitely have you back.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, guys. It's always good catching up with you.
Yeah, but hopefully maybe we'll cross paths at a flyway meeting or something again one of these days. And
sounds good.
Hang out.
Get an invite to come shoot pheasants. He brought it up, not me.
Yeah.
I know
Yeah,
he ain't gonna invite me up there to shoot pheasants. So.
Yeah.
No. And also that's an option too. If we get some weather to push some ducks down here, you can come down and see Mississippi again. Imagine it's been a hot minute since you've been down here. So
it's been a bit. Yeah, I miss it sometimes for sure.
I doubt it's changed that much.
Starkville, I don't know that I could find my way around there. And I thought I knew that place.
Yeah.
So
Starkville's changed a lot. Yeah. Dwayne was here. Dwayne Elmore was here.
Yeah.
It's not
when Dwayne was here, he was like, I have no idea where I am anymore. Like,
yeah.
But anyway, well, Matt, thank you so much.
Thank
really
you, guys.
good chatting with you, and like I said, we'll have you back, and maybe find ourselves hunting either up your way or down our way soon.
Sounds good, guys. Appreciate you.
See ya.
Thanks for joining us on Game Bird University Podcast. To keep up to date on when new episodes are dropped, or for more information on game birds and their management, you can follow us on Instagram at MSUEXT_GameBird, or follow us on Facebook at MSU Extension Game Bird Program.